Hello, everyone, and welcome to RBA's webinar this afternoon. My name is Marissa Sertich-Feely, and I'm the Executive Director of the Retail Bakers of America. The Retail Bakers of America, for those who are not familiar, is a national trade association that supports education, networking, and success in the retail baking industry. We have a great session for you today with Lesaffre. Lesaffre North America is a trusted partner to bakers around the continent, working to make the art of bread making more productive, creative, and inspiring. They are a global player in fermentation, providing yeast and ingredient solutions to bakers. We have it with us here today, Michael Bultel. Michael is a food technologist with more than 25 years experience in baking ingredients. And we also have Ralf Tschenscher. Ralf is a master baker from Germany, as well as a former bakery owner. Ralf joined Lesaffre in 2002, and he is currently the Baking Business Development Manager with Lesaffre. Thank you both so much for being here. We're excited to learn all about yeast today.
Thank you very much, Marissa.
Thank you very much, Marissa. Pleasure to support the RBA activity and then sharing some knowledge with the people and with the retail bakery especially.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Just concerning maybe the organization, we will go through let's say a quick presentation, quick intro about who is Lesaffre, then going to this yeast and the fermentation, and specifically focus on the dough. Just we will let you look at the chat box if there is anything, Marissa. Just let us know. We can share and just alert us this way.
Sounds great.
That looks
all right. So I think you did
the introduction was already done. So my name is Ralf Tschenscher, and thank you everyone for attending this presentation. We hope it's going to be beneficial not only to you but also to your business. And we're looking forward to your questions later on.
Yeah. So hello everyone. Happy to share some knowledge. I'm in Lesaffre since 18 years, so quite long time, but quite new, only 2 years in North America for me. So learning and being French, I'm in love of bread, and as you know, fermentation is key for us. So that's that part that we want to share. So just few words about the company, Lesaffre. It's a family-owned company. The headquarters is in France, north of France. This is the place where it was Louis Pasteur, that you may know, which is an important guy for the fermentation. Lesaffre is organized all around the microorganism and fermentation. A big part of that is supporting and supplying the bakers, the bakers for yeast, the bacteria, sourdough ingredients for bread making activities. But more than that, we in Lesaffre we also offer yeast with fermenters, for example, for beer, wine maker, yeast extract with biospringer, which is food, taste, and pleasure activities. Some biotechnology. You may know about ethanol. So, for example, Lesaffre produces yeast for people that produce ethanol. And we have as well yeast and bacteria for the healthcare. And this activity are more around, for example, Meiosis for human healthcare, Phileo for animal feeds, and Agoxin for the plant care. So that's a quick presentation, but the things that are really key for Lesaffre and let's say the core business and the knowledge is all around microorganism, so yeast and bacteria. Concerning the bakers and the bread making activities, we are proud this year to celebrate this 50 years anniversary of what we name Baking Center. And Ralf and myself, we are part of this organization for Lesaffre, which is a technical support for all the bakers around the world. So happy to be there. Not since 50 years, but for the Baking Center, yeah. The story started in 1974, and now continuing with that, with more than 50 baking centers in the world. And you will see a bit later that 2 are in US. A few numbers around Lesaffre. So yeast bacteria are sold in many countries in the world. We produce as well in many plants, 77 at this stage. More important for us is just all about R&D, research, and this kind of things, because the biotechnology and even it's from the nature, it's always evolving, and good to have a good knowledge that we can apply in what we call application center, and baking center is a big part of that. So 63 application center in the world, 50 as a baking center, and some other are culinary. More focus on the North America, as we are here today, Ralf, myself, in Milwaukee, in our headquarters, which is the headquarters of Lesaffre. But first of all, about the production, there is a big production plant in Iowa, Cedar Rapids, for Lesaffre, concerning yeast and concerning baking ingredients. We have an application center, which is an innovation center in Chicago, about the pizza. There is one more factory in the Dothan, Alabama, concerning the yeast. And then, as I said, we are based today in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is the headquarters, so all the admin part, plus a baking center and a culinary center. So for guys that are around, it's always welcome to visit us. And we have one other baking center at the moment in Piscataway, New Jersey, so for the East Coast. And not sharing too much, but we have a project to open one more on the west part of the country. So that's the Lesaffre North America picture, with local production, local technical support. So we are really happy to always to support the bakers. Yeast, for those that don't really know on that, it's obviously usually well known for the yeast. And here in the US, it's the Lesaffre and Red Star brand, but we are doing more than yeast. So all about the baking ingredients and the sourdough product. So this is really let's say the key components of the bread making offer. You may know some of the brands. For the yeast is mainly Red Star, South Instant. For the dough conditioner and all that kind of clean label solution, it's Soft Pro ingredients. As well, sourdough is under Live and Dough, and we have some bases, which is Star Bake, and Azteca is more about Hispanic product line. So that's a quick overview of what Lesaffre can offer here in North America. So North America means US and Canada for our support. So let's move now in the core of the presentation, which is all about the fermentation. And as you see on the picture, bread is a big component of that, and always pleasure to share bread, cheese, wine. This is all about the fermentation. And yeah, just a few words about that. For sure, fermentation is very, very a long story, and coming from the nature that the human people try to learn, still learning, because there is a lot to learn about that, but and try to do that the best for the good product. We'll go now on, let's say, some kind of biochemistry, some few words around that, about what is behind this word of fermentation, because I guess you guys, you all know a very nice product, nice breads, nice sourdough bread, everything on that. So we all appreciate that. But behind this kind of nice product, there is some science, and this is what we want to try to share today. So some, say, quick theoretical part, and later we will jump on what's happened in the dough. So the first part with the fermentation, in fact, one ferment is yeast. So Saccharomyces cerevisiae is the main yeast used in the bread activity. So the yeast, you may know, will generate CO2, alcohol, and aromatic compounds, which is the key flavor of the bread. But fermentation is also more than yeast for the bread making activities, as it's also all about bacteria, and lactic bacteria, lactobacillus especially. And just here is let's say, quick summary of two types of lactic bacteria we can find in our activities, which is homolactic or heterolactic, but no need to go too deep into that. The most important is knowing that the fermentation could be yeast, could be bacteria. And when it's about bacteria, it's something that you and every baker identify as a sourdough. So bacteria are very active in that sourdough, means very, very long fermentation. And this is where it will generate acidity because the lactic bacteria generate during the fermentation lactic acid for some of them, and lactic acid, acetic acid, other kind of organic acid, depend the bacteria you are using or you have from the wild, let's say, environment. Because when you make your own sourdough, it's a wild microorganism that you cultivate that. And obviously, it generates as well aromatic compounds. So just to as a reminder or to explain also that fermentation in the bread making is yeast most of the time, but yeast and bacteria when it's about sourdough bread preparation. And this is not, let's say, against. Yeast and bacteria will work together. In fact, they don't bring exactly the same things. So this is not just, okay, because we heard sometime, oh yeah, I want that one because there is no yeast, or I want this one because I don't like acidity, but it's all together. So it depends process and all your recipe that you will do, that you will, in fact, generate a favorable environment, or for the yeast, if you do a very short fermentation, or for the bacteria, if you go very long fermentation and preliminary stage. So that's how it become a sourdough bread. So yes, I think many people do not realize that bread looks very simple, very simple ingredients, very, very, very nice. But behind that, when we want to understand, and this is part of our goal in Lesaffre Baking Center teams, in the technical teams, there is a lot of science. So everyone can make a bread at home, but you see, when you do bread, it's not every day the same. And most important for us is trying to understand what's happened behind that and what is the science behind that in order to guide better the bakers, the customer, the people who are asking us, let's say, for technical advices. So yeah, that's again a bit of chemistry, because we talk about fermentation, but fermentation in the bread making activity, it's not just about yeast. If I take the example, many times we have questions from bakers, oh, my dough is not rising well. The yeast should not be good. Yeah, but maybe it's not the yeast, because when you mix the ingredients, when you do the mixing stage, you blend flour, water, salt, and you create a gluten network, the proteins. And these proteins, for example, will be key to keep the CO2 produced by the yeast, and then the visual effect, you will see the dough rising. So it's not just because the yeast do not produce CO2, but CO2 needs to remain in the dough. And for that, there is very key components, the proteins from the flours. So what we name gluten. Then you have in this mixing stage, you have also the starches, which is also small sugar to feed yeast and enzymes. So all about the biochemistry, we have just seen before that this kind of component will feed the microorganism, and then the effect that we will see is rising effect during the proofing time, because all that kind of reaction needs time and a good condition. Good condition is the temperature and the time, obviously, at least 1 hour or 2 hours, depending of the level of yeast. But if you look at having sourdough, then it would be much, much longer. And depending of the time and the condition, you will, as I said before, you will give a favorable condition for the yeast or for the bacteria, and then you will generate different organic acid. Finally, okay, the baking stage. which is something that you stop all the alive microorganisms, and this is key, and this is why later the bread is stable. So you convert during the baking stage the dough in the bread, and then with the temperature, we kill all the microorganisms on that. So that's a quick overview about this chemistry behind the bread making process. So yeast 101, let's go deeper, or let's have a focus on the yeast. This is the purpose of this session for that. What is yeast, in fact? We are used to say in Lesaffre, we do not manufacture yeast, and our, let's say, Lesaffre family owner, they are really feel like really important that we grow yeast, in fact, because this is on some way like an animal. This is a really small alive microorganism, and it's very, very small, but it's really exceptional by the way that it can duplicate. You can see at the bottom right how the yeast cell will duplicate, means from one cell we will get 2 cells, and this is what's happened in our plants. In fact, this is what we try to do. The yeast for the bread making is a species named Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the most important. Obviously, yeast is key. You cannot make any bread or cannot rise any dough without yeast, even in a very small amount, even wild one from a sourdough. But yeast can be also used as directly. You may see that as yeast flakes. People use it on the salad, or because this is very rich in different minerals, different vitamins. So that's also very good for the health. And this is more the focus of our Lesaffre division, working to propose product for healthcare. So yeah, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. This is here you can read what does it mean. In fact, this is a fungus from the fungus, means the mushroom. It's almost like myces means the mushroom, in same roots for that. Eating sugar, and originally, people learn that could make beer, in fact, because instead of a dough, if you drop yeast in the flours plus water in a liquid, let's say solution, means a lot of water, you will generate alcohol and you will generate aromatic compounds, and it can go to a beer, the original cerevisiae. And an overview of the process, how to produce yeast, because most of you knows how to use it, but how do we grow the yeast in the Lesaffre factory and any kind of factory? We start from the strain. So the strain collection is really like so important. This is the bank of Lesaffre, because strains are really key. So our R&D in headquarters keep that frozen, very cold temperature, as you can see, starting with very small quantity, and then going in a flask, much more, a bit bigger, few liter, let's say like that, and then going in a small tanks. So this flask will be done in the lab area, but then we drop the flask in a small tanks. This is in the industrial plant. And then we feed this small quantity at the beginning with oxygen, with nutrients, with different vitamins, and with one of the key things is sugar. We feed the yeast with molasses, and this is where you usually use that. Here about molasses are one of the key components for the yeast producer, or also with syrup, because here in US we can use syrup. And then we feed the yeast, and the yeast is growing by multiplication. Then when it's the optimum level, we have let's say a few thousand pounds of that liquid cream, yeast cream. We will do that you can see at the bottom on the centrifugation, and then we will separate, let's say, some water, and having a commercial cream yeast that we will store in the cold temperature, in a chiller, let's say, chill temperature, to stabilize it. Because then we don't want to duplicate anymore. And from this cream yeast, there is few options. Or we supply industrial bakeries with cream yeast, as it is, means a liquid one. Or we remove a bit of water and go through a vacuum filter, so it remove a bit of water. And we'll make some blocks. So this is what people knows as a compressed yeast, block of yeast. Still a fresh yeast, but this is block. So fresh yeast is usually for us cream yeast, blocks, or even if we mix the blocks, we have crumble yeast, which is similar to blocks, but more easier to handle when you are doing the weighing stage, automatic weighing stage. And then we can have one more step, which is drying the yeast. So from the crumbled one, from the fresh one, we even remove much more water. And then we have this dry yeast that you can find as instant yeast in the market. So, but they are all alive microorganisms inside. Even the dry yeast still alive. It's just like really specific process to dry and protect at the same time the cells. So this is a few picture about where all our technical guys works. Obviously, it's a lot about tanks and pipes and that kind of things, because this is where we are to duplicate and the yeast, and then to prepare the blocks and the products for the baker. I will let now Ralf handling the second part of that, and we'll have a focus on the dough. Thank you. And let's keep the question, I guess, for the end. I'm not sure we mentioned that, but will be a Q&A session at the end.
Thank you, Michael. Just to show you here on the right-hand side is actually our Cedar Rapids plant, which is now, and we are very proud of that, the largest fresh yeast plant in the world. To the top left is our Dothan plant. That's a specialty yeast plant where we make customized products. In this plant, we are also producing, and we are very proud of that we are the only company in North America producing certified organic yeast. And then down here to the left, you see our ingredients plant where we're producing functional ingredients for the baking industry. So yeast has, in general, 3 functions, and I think we all know of that. The first one would be as a leavening, that's the main function, but also to maturing the dough and even helping build a stronger gluten network. And that one you usually notice when you allow your dough to rest for a certain amount of time. You're punching it down, allow it to rise again. So long fermentation process. And then the last one, obviously, a good bread supposed to provide also not only a nice aroma, but also a nice flavor. So yeast can be impacted in many ways, and there are several factors which is affecting fermentation, and I wouldn't mind to touch base on that one. The first one would be, as we all know, temperature. The pH of the dough can impact fermentation, as well sugar. If you're using mold inhibitors, some do, some don't, but they can have an impact. As well, if you're creating osmotic pressure by making high sugar doughs. There could be also frozen dough production that will impact yeast activity as well. But let's start maybe with the temperature of your dough. Here in this chart, we actually made 3 identical doughs with the same amount of salt, sugar, yeast, water absorption, but the only change what we made is we changed the dough temperature. We have one with 53, 65, and 78 degrees. And if we look at that, in general, as Michael mentioned earlier, an average fermentation time for bread is around 60 minutes. So if we're looking at a dough temperature of 78 Fahrenheit, that provides us approximately 350 CO2, and the fermentation time is approximately 60 minutes. The identical dough with a lower dough temperature of 53 takes 90 minutes. So that's a discrepancy of approximately 50, not approximately, it's actually 50%. So there's nothing wrong with that. However, the message here is really it is important to have consistent dough temperature, especially if somebody in the audience here wants to go into the baking. Consistent dough temperature provides consistent consistent fermentation time. Then obviously what's happening to yeast when it's exposed to certain temperatures. If you're looking at temperatures at around 33 to 35, 36, yeast is almost idle or dormant, so there's very small activity. And artisan bakers actually preferring some of their breads to keep it in the refrigeration to either let the levain ferment very slowly, or yeast-raised doughs with commercialized yeast that also creates flavor into the dough. In general, the bakers using a fermentation box or proof box where you have temperatures around 85 to 90. In my personal opinion, that's ideal temperature with about 90% humidity, 85 to 90% humidity. And that provides a very healthy environment for yeast-raised products. If you're pushing it, and we do see bakers pushing sometimes or they want to expedite the fermentation process, the increasing the dough temperature, the proof box temperature around 100, 110. There's nothing wrong with it. The only thing what I make people, bakers aware of, if you're forcing CO2 production very rapidly, you have to ensure that your gluten network is very strong to hold the pressure created by the yeast. And then when you bake your product, the yeast will die off at a temperature of 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So hydration also impacts fermentation. And I always try to say to people, try to use as much as possible water for several reasons. It brings down your cost per pound. It also helps a longer shelf life. However, just to looking at an example here over a 2-hour period, if you're making a dough with a water absorption of 54% and identical dough with the same amount of yeast with 58%, same dough temperature, your CO2 production with 58% is actually much better than with 54%. So again, try to increase as much as possible water into your doughs. Obviously, with certain products like bagels and pretzels, you have a relative low water absorption compared to ciabatta, where you have a very high water absorption. Sugar, obviously, we all know impacts fermentation as well. Here is on this chart, we want to try to explain when you don't add any sugar into your dough, you're getting a nice CO2 production on the beginning of the curve, but then the yeast cannot feed anymore, and there is a lack of maltose, which we see here. Then usually enzymes breaking down the starches to produce glucose, and then the yeast can feed from there, and you see again fermentation going on either in the proof box or ambient temperature. This chart here, or this curve here, shows you by adding just 2%, you see how that accelerates the fermentation time by using the identical dough temperature and yeast amount. This actually then slows them down when you increase your sugar content from 2 to 6 or to 12 or to 18%. So usually what happens is that you're creating osmotic pressure, and there where we usually recommend to consider looking into an osmotolerant yeast. Salt, obviously, has a major impact as well, and it happens to the best. It happens to me that we maybe forget salt. That actually is actually very beautiful because your dough mixes very, very fast. You get a lot of extensibility because the more salt you add into your dough, it actually tightens your gluten network. But it also, as you can see in that chart, from 0% to 2.5%, it actually reduces the amount of CO2. Either if you're using a dough with a high sugar dough, here in this example, we used 15% of sugar, but a similar chart you will see if you're using less sugar. So, and that brings us to the types of yeast we promote here in North America. As Michael mentioned, the first version of yeast being produced is cream yeast. That's designed for industrialized bakeries. They actually pumping it direct from the silo into the mixer. The second version is where you extract some water, is a crumbled yeast, and the crumbled you can compare it with crumbles for like a cake crumble. Those ones is for intermediate bakeries who are using a minimum of 2,000 pounds a week. And then compressed yeast is the same as the crumbled yeast, just it is compressed and being individual wrapped in 1 pounder or 5 times 1 pound. And that's for intermediate wholesale bakeries, but also for retail bakeries, supermarkets, or pizzerias. Then there's 2 types of version of dry yeast versions, as Michael indicated. The yeast is being exposed to heat, and the first dry yeast available globally is actually active dry yeast. And then in the 70s, instant yeast was developed. And the instant yeast is really for the convenience of use, and is also very effective. Active dry yeast, on the other hand, it's a very good yeast as well because it holds up to really extreme temperatures in areas where you have challenges getting fresh yeast, and it holds up to extreme heats much better than fresh yeast or even instant yeast. So what is the difference? There's really 4 differences on the yeast types. The first one is the dry matter. So in actually the microorganism, what we have in liquid yeast is anywhere between 50 and 20% of solids. Fresh and compressed yeast has 30 to 34. And active dry yeast has 93 to 97. And instant yeast has 94 to 96. So in other words is you have active solids in there, the rest is actually water if you're calculating it to 100%. Then a significant difference is obviously the shelf life. The shelf life for cream yeast is in general between 14 up to 21 days. Compressed yeast is 21 to 28 days. Crumbled yeast usually 21 days, and instant or active dry yeast is 2 years unopened as long as the vacuum is intact. And the storage, we all know fresh yeast requires refrigeration, has a much shorter shelf life. So there's some pros and cons. However, it's very active. So the temperatures we're looking preferable around 35 up to 45. I prefer in the 35 to 40 degrees. That's my personal opinion. And then the application on fresh yeast is a cream, crumbled, or block yeast is direct application. And then active dry yeast requires rehydration, and instant yeast is direct. And I will go into that a little bit more. So here, just to summarize the liquid yeast, the crumbled yeast, and the compressed yeast, I'm actually repeating myself to a degree. So as you see here in the picture, the cream yeast is almost the viscosity of buttermilk. We mentioned the shelf life. Again, this is a yeast which we offer in North America really only to industrialized bakeries. In Europe, we actually offering that solution also to retail bakeries where we have it in a bag in a box. Again, for easier to use, you don't have to open up packaging. So it's very popular in Europe. Unfortunately, because of distances, it's not available here in North America. Crumbled yeast. This is something, as I mentioned, for intermediate wholesale bakeries. The convenience on this one is really you're opening up the bag and you scoop it out and scale it as it is. And there usually we're looking at a usage level of 2,000 pounds. We have two versions of the crumbled yeast, one for frozen dough production. It's a special yeast strain just for frozen dough production. And then we have regular conventional crumbled yeast. And we also have liquid yeast for frozen dough production as well, besides conventional and some even customized one. And then our compressed yeast comes in 1 pound blocks, as you see here. We also have it in sleeves where it's 5 times 1 pound. We're saying 1 pound block, so please keep in mind the yeast goes through a guillotine. I still strongly recommend to scale fresh yeast, even if it says 1 pound. It could be a little bit more, a little bit less. But a case is at a 20 pound has at least 20 pounds in there. Sometimes it's even a little bit more. So that's just a little bit about the yeast. Storage condition is very important. And what we also suggest to customers, we do see it sometimes when a baker purchases the yeast too much. He's saying, well, I'm going to put it into the freezer. It's something we do not recommend because you will destroy some of the membranes of the yeast cells. And when you take it back out, you have less activity depending on how you're freezing it and for how long it was in the freezer. So regardless, is it cream yeast, crumbled or block yeast, please do not place it into the freezer for a longer period of time or even a short period of time. You will destroy some of the yeast cells. So it is very important, should you decide to or contemplate to look at fresh yeast, ensure that you have proper refrigeration. We have seen it, people leaving the yeast sometimes out in the summer times, even in the winter times. It sits for several hours in the bakery. This is really a no-no. We do understand that sometimes you have a rush, but we really try to promote to keep the yeast, regardless is it block, crumbled or cream yeast, it has to be refrigerated as long as possible. So we encourage to scale it just prior usage and taking it out from the fridge prior usage. Again, rotation is also very important. Sometimes we do see that people say, well, our yeast activity is not good. And it does happen. We're all humans. We found out that there was a rotation issue. So this is very important. If you be big enough to buy pallets or only you buying by the case, there's nothing wrong with that. However, mark the case. Even there's expiration codes on there. Mark the case when you got it in so that your team members know which one to pick first. In order to use up the oldest as fast as possible. If you have block yeast, ensure to have it, keep it as long as possible in the cellophane wrapping because it keeps it away from oxygen. Oxygen is needed for yeast to be active. So for example, crumbled yeast, if you open up the bag, we encourage customers, if you're using, let's say, only 20 pounds out of the 50 pounds, make it airtight so there's no oxygen in there, and that keeps the integrity of the yeast. And then also to provide good air circulation, when you put the yeast in the fridge, avoid having it besides the entrance door, because if you have high traffic in there, there's temperature fluctuation. So it is important that the yeast is in cool environment. Also, if possible, you can place it on a shelving where the cooling fan blows air in there so that you have proper circulation. And also never to store it on the floor or flat surface or against the wall because you're keeping airflow away from the fresh yeast. And then obviously try to schedule your yeast as good as possible. We understand sometimes it does happen that you have to carry over. It's usually not a problem. Even if you reach the 28 days marks on the yeast before this expires, the yeast still will perform. However, if it's being kept in very good conditions, you shouldn't have a problem. If you have temperature fluctuations, there could be maybe a little bit of activity loss on the yeast. So active dry yeast, as I mentioned earlier, that was the first version of dry yeast, and this is being actually heat treated, and 25% of your outer layer is actually being destroyed. And if you see here on that in that chart, you see actually the core of the yeast is still active, and active dry yeast requires to be rehydrated with warm water. Some people say use 100, 110. I personally prefer 90 degrees. And the reason why I'm saying 90 degrees, if you're using 110 degrees and let's say you're getting distracted for whatever, you allow your yeast to bloom for a few minutes, and you do get distracted, you can lose a significant amount of yeast activity. So I prefer using 1 part of active dry yeast, 5 part of 90 degrees warm water, and then rehydrating it with the water. Let it sit for 5 minutes. Should you proceed with that solution, it is ensured to train new team members who are allowed to proceed with a rehydration process, that you have a very good understanding that it is important that when you rehydrate the yeast, that you don't get distracted and do something else, because it can provide activity issues. So the one advantage on the active dry yeast also, that, as I mentioned, the outer layer is actually heat treated. That actually provides that yeast, and that yeast actually provides glutathione, and the glutathione actually allows your protein to relax better. It gives you a little bit more extensibility into your dough. And in my opinion, it also provides a better flavor profile onto yeast-raised doughs. The product, as mentioned, is shelf stable and has a shelf life of 2 years. If you're opening it up, we still recommend to putting it into the fridge. We know many bakeries or pizzerias do not do it, but it is our obligation to say so, just to ensure to keep the integrity. And then once opened, like I said, put it into the fridge. We're saying 10 days. Usually it is more, but we have to give some kind of a time frame. And let's say you're only a small producer, there's nothing wrong with it. If you don't need it and you're buying larger quantities, 2 pounds or 50-pound units, you can put it into the freezer. It is for sure good for 3 months. So that brings us to our instant yeast. There are several solutions what we have. We have the Saaf Instant Red, the Saaf Instant Gold, Premium, and then we have the Platinum. And I can go into that a little bit later. So the compressed yeast has been protected by a specific drying process that allows the yeast to be called instant yeast, and Lesaffre developed that in the early 70s. And this yeast does not require any rehydration. You blend it with your dry ingredients, add your water into it or milk, whatever you do, and you proceed with it. So it's a very easy to use yeast. Convenience is there because, again, it doesn't require refrigeration. It has a shelf life from 2 years. Easy to store at ambient temperature. And again, when you're opening it up, we suggest to use it for 10 days in the fridge and 3 months in the freezer. Now, instant yeast or active dry yeast, as it is, you can freeze it, as I indicated, so there's not an issue. It will not harm the yeast, and for a simple reason, because there's hardly any moisture in there, as indicated in the previous slide. So the dry yeast specifications, it is important that when you use the yeast that you check your date. So the fresher the better, even with instant yeast. If you're buying a case of instant yeast as an example, and you see a soft pack, and that can happen because the box dropped, landed incorrectly, and that can deflate the box or open up the vacuum packaging. We usually recommend not to use it because we don't know when that happened. So over time, you can lose activity on the yeast. Obviously, if you do have questions, to call technical support, but it's not the end of our presentation yet. But if you have ever questions, we, the technical team, or your regional sales manager is always there to help you. So here's a little bit about the applications and the uniqueness of the yeast. So the Saaf Instant Red is the most common product on the market. You see here also the Saaf Instant Gold. We still receive a lot of questions. Why Saaf Instant Gold? The Saaf Instant Gold is actually an osmotolerant yeast. That means when you have a high amount of sugar, you're creating osmotic pressure. The sugar in a combination with a salt actually is very hygroscopic. It takes moisture away from the yeast, and moisture is essential, as explained in the previous chart, to get proper CO2 production. So the Saaf Instant Gold is actually adapted to high sugar dose. And then we have the Saaf Instant Premium. That's actually a yeast which provides about 10% more activity compared to the Saaf Instant Gold. Now, can you use still Saaf Instant Gold to high sugar dose? Absolutely, no question about it. We do have customers who are making concha buns, croissant, Danish. However, many bakers who ever try this one here in high sugar dose notice the difference, and they are willing to carry two types of yeast in the bakery. Red Star Active and compressed yeast, just a brief summary. The Red Star, we just talked about it. The advantage on this yeast really provides you glutathione and provides you also a little bit more of fermentation flavor. So does the compressed yeast. The negative thing on compressed yeast, it requires refrigeration. It's not a problem. However, for some bakeries, it is. And the Platinum is actually an instant yeast with the dough conditioners, which is also a successful line for us for certain customers who want to have a two-in-one solution. In terms of the code dates or expiration date, you find that in the back. You see 01/22, that's the manufacturing date, and then the expiration date. Down there is an internal reference that gives you really the indication who produced the yeast, what kind of ingredients was used, and where it has been shipped. So that's an internal information. Should you have ever an issue, that's something what we need should you ever experience a problem with the yeast. And here's a brief conversion chart. As an example, I thought I'm going to make it in metric. It's a little bit easier. So if you're using 100 grams of fresh yeast, you would need to use only 50 grams of active dry yeast with an additional of 50 ml of water. However, when I rehydrate active dry yeast, I usually use 5 times the amount of water than compared to the active dry yeast. So it's easier to dissolve. And you just calculate that from your total moisture absorption. And 100 grams of active dry of compressed yeast is equivalent to 33% of instant yeast in a combination with an additional 66% of water. So the conclusion, fermentation is without a doubt a natural and essential transformation. Yeast is an active microorganism, and fermentation is a biological process affected by many parameters where we just spoke about it, like temperature, process, etc. It is really important to control the condition for your yeast, that you have a consistent product. Majority of breads produced around the world are made with yeast. So without yeast, we cannot provide humankind, close to 9 billion people, a basic stable food. So yeast is very important, and we are proud to be producing and growing yeast for you. And we hope that the session was beneficial for you. The role of the infinitely small in naturally is infinitely large by Louis Pasteur. And now we are open for any questions you may have, and we try our best to answer them. thank you again, everyone.
Thank you very, very much for all of that incredible information. If anyone has questions, make sure you add them to the chat. I did have a question. So many of our bakers, when talking about yeast, talk about flavor development. And it comes up a lot. And I just, the difference between the compressed yeast and the instant yeast, and if there are differences in flavor there as well. I know you talked about the active dry and differences in flavor. But do you find there's a difference between the compressed and the instant as well?
Well, it depends who you're talking to. I personally think yes, there is in a short dough process. If you're using an instant yeast and you're making a short process within producing breads or pizza within 3 hours. But if you're maturing your dough, you're creating alcohol notes, alcohol flavors, aroma. I think you don't notice it that much anymore. Then also, if you infuse your doughs with certain other ingredients, different types of cereal or flour combinations, I personally prefer instant yeast. Works very well, provides superb gassing power. If you're making a long fermentation process, I don't think so that you notice it. Short term, I probably would agree.
Yeah, because this is also based on the quantity of yeast you drop in the mixer, because short fermentation, you will usually use higher dosage of yeast, when very long fermentation, lower. And as Ralf mentioned, yeah, you could perceive some differences.
Yeah, so based on timing then.
Yeah.
Yeah. How would you advise bakery owners, if they have formulas, if their recipes are formulated with instant or fresh, how to make a decision in terms of what to choose?
That's a very good question, Marissa. I joined Lesaffre 22 years ago. I'm native German. I never worked with instant yeast, to be very honest, and I learned it. And I saying it's really a beautiful type of solution, yeah. And we bakers are sometimes a little bit, if we been trained with something, that's what we really want. But to me, it was a big eye-opener working with instant yeast and active dry yeast and with cream yeast, that you can get exactly the same solution. Now, one thing what I forgot to mention is instant yeast is not suited for frozen dough production. Fresh yeast or active dry yeast can be used. Instant yeast is not suited for long-term frozen dough production. So there's pro and cons. Again, it really depends on how you're being raised or how you're being taught baking. I think a lot of bakeries who have difficulties to access fresh yeast, I definitely would encourage them to consider either active dry yeast or instant yeast, because you have a much better yeast activity available than if you have not regular access to fresh yeast.
Yeah, as Ralf explained about the shelf life. So fresh yeast is obviously a shorter shelf life. So you need to, let's say, to have a certain consumption in order to change and to refresh that. If so, most of the time people will use fresh or dry, depending of their, let's say, the availability of the fresh and the possibility to use it very often.
Mm.
If it's a small amount of consumption, then people goes more for the dry.
Okay, thank you. We do have a question here. It's actually about the origins of yeast. The question is from Ruth, and she's asking, did the origin of yeast come from the wild and then keep propagating through the years as a harvest to grow? What I think the question is, was yeast being propagated long ago, or is that new, or were people just
No,
doing
the
sour?
microorganism Saccharomyces cerevisiae, it's everywhere.
Mhm.
You just have to find that strain. It's usually plant-based. So all our yeast and our good competitors' yeast are all non-GMO. So there's no worries about genetically modified, if that was the indication. So as Michael indicated, we keep our microorganism in a strain at minus 80 degrees Celsius to keep the integrity in that one. And you can recultivate it on your own without using any GMO.
Yeah, and the main reason for that is for sure it's similar to, and it's coming from the wild microorganism we collected long time ago. But having this way is also to avoid any undesirable propagation, not having extra microorganisms that people will not need. So that's why we take from our strains bank, and then we multiply that.
So what is very important to understand is that everybody who makes sourdoughs, they're natural sourdoughs without a sourdough, an actual bacterial culture. Sourdough bakers, they can notice different performance under sourdoughs, and that could be because it's cross-contaminated with microorganism you have in the air or created during your process. So it is very important that the yeast performs as consistent as possible, and there where you need to have the right amount of microorganism to grow them and provide the performance the bakers are looking for.
Okay.
Consistency.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Is there information you'd like to give our audience if they would like more information on your products?
Yeah, you can go onto our website. It's oops, that's embarrassing now. Lesaffre.com. Just go onto on our website. I believe that will be also posted. You can reach us by email, Michael and myself. If you currently not using any yeast or a competitor yeast and you're looking for something new, we're more than happy to share samples with you, talk to you, and any way you would like to, we're more than happy to help you with finding your right yeast solution.
Yeah, so beside the Lesaffre product in the website, or we also have an e-commerce web store. If for people who want to learn more about the yeast, there is a specific website which is exploreyeast.com. You have it in the presentation on the conclusion slide. This is people that can learn more about that, but we are always happy to answer to questions, so you can contact us.
Perfect. Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, they can reach out to me as well. Make sure you're checking out the RBA website in the events tab to see what else we have in store for you. And thank you again, and have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marissa, and thank you to all the audience.
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.